Deus Ex Mankind Divided is an absolute breath of fresh air in a sea of games with open worlds as large as they are lifeless. The city of Prague, in which you spend the majority of your time, is frankly tiny by modern standards, and yet it is so densely packed that every square inch feels handcrafted and rewarding. It was Warren Spector, creator of the original Deus Ex, who said that he'd rather games be a mile deep than a mile wide, and I'm sure he'd be happy with the layered and intricate world on offer here. By all rights, other games should have copied what Mankind Divided does with its world. Nearly 5 years after release, we should already have a sequel to this game, and the completion of the modern trilogy of Deus Ex games, plus a bunch of copycats of varying quality. Instead, developers still focus on making worlds larger, not better, with more and more copy and pasted assets and mission design, while the developers of Mankind Divided, Eidos Montreal, have had to make a live service Avengers game which has performed so badly that Mankind Divided looks like a huge success by comparison. The good news, if you can call it that, is the failure of Mankind Divided is not really down to gamers rejecting quality over quantity in map design. The poor sales can be attributed to a story which is both boring and incomplete, not to mention borderline offensive in its cheap attempt to capitalise on real-world issues like Black Lives Matter. Combine that with some truly awful marketing that double down on loaded terms like mechanical apartheid, while also throwing in a load of microtransaction and pre-order nonsense, and you have a recipe for disaster. Even 5 years later, Mankind Divided hasn't escaped the reputation it earned a year before release. It's still known as the game that offered 5 different pre-order tiers, or the one that thought comparing the treatment of rich augmented humans to the struggles faced by people of colour in the modern world was an appropriate way to market a game. All of which is a great shame because Mankind Divided has a lot going for it, and most of my time with the game was positive. The previous game in the series, Human Revolution, wasn't a huge success, but it appears to have made a profit, and Square Enix greenlit a sequel immediately. Surprisingly, Eidos Montreal weren't the first choice developers to make the sequel. In a 2017 interview, Fergus Urquhart stated that Square Enix asked Obsidian to make the sequel to Human Revolution. I can't find any more information on why or what happened to that deal, but obviously Eidos Montreal did end up making Mankind Divided, not Obsidian. Human Revolution was critically well received, and it seems only logical to give the same team the chance to build on what they learned instead of starting again from scratch. I do like Obsidian as a developer team and certainly have a lot of respect for Fergus Urquhart, but I have to admit I am glad Eidos Montreal got to make the sequel. They took their sweet time over it though. Development on Mankind Divided started in 2011 after the completion of the Missing Link DLC for Human Revolution, but it wasn't released until August 2016 after a 6-month delay. While 5-year development cycles are not unheard of, it is at the long end, especially for a sequel where many of the gameplay systems were already in place. Eidos Montreal put this down to teething problems with the new technology. Whereas Human Revolution was released on PS3 and Xbox 360, Mankind Divided was to be a PS4 and Xbox One game, with PC ports for both of course. Visually, Mankind Divided is a big upgrade compared to Human Revolution. I'd say it was worth the wait. Graphics don't always matter, but the high fidelity visuals complement the map design. You really need to pay attention to the world as you explore, and the fact that it looks so damn good makes that a nice experience. You'd think it would be easy to sell consumers on a visually stunning game that's part of a highly regarded franchise and following up a successful reboot 5 years prior. Apparently not. Square Enix made a mess of the promotion from beginning to end. It created a couple of terrible trailers, including a live action one that focused on the suffering of augmented humans in the Deus Ex world. I'll talk about that more when I get to the story. The other major marketing balls up was the Augment Your Pre-Order fiasco, which is every bit as bad as it sounds. To disclose my obvious bias, I am not a big fan of pre-ordering digital content at the best of times. I just can't see the point in giving massive corporations my money a year early for no or minuscule benefit. I'm not a moneylender, and if I was I would demand more in terms of interest than an ugly new coat for Jensen. Anyway, those who pre-ordered the game could choose a bonus from each of 5 tiers, with the 5th tier also granting 4 days early access to the game, a trend that has fortunately died a death in recent years. The tiers had to be unlocked by the world as a whole by getting to certain levels of pre-orders. Levels that were of course never disclosed because it would be a bit embarrassing if Square Enix never met them. The intent was clearly to encourage pre-orders and to get you to in turn encourage others to pre-order so you could all share the wealth. Now first of all, if you're doing the whole pre-order bonus thing, you should damn well be giving every pre-order bonus to every single one of those strange individuals who opts to give you money for nothing. It's literally the least you could do. I'd be furious if I paid $60 or more for a product that wouldn't be out for nearly a year, only to find out that I wasn't even getting all of the cheap crap being given away. Worst of all though, the marketing copy was the most patronising, stupid nonsense you'll ever see. There was the obligatory defence that states it's all about choice when what you're really doing was choosing the things you wouldn't get. And then there was this line, overcome the division of mankind to unite and fully unlock and augment your pre-order. As if everyone getting together to buy Mankind Divided a year early was somehow going to bring humanity together and, solve world peace. The campaign rightly drew criticism from all sides, ironically uniting a large and often divided population in the process. It was soon cancelled and everyone who pre-ordered got all the goodies. I guess that counts as a win. The 6-month delay to the release date did at least put a bit of distance between this marketing campaign and the game, although the damage had already been done. Which is a great shame because particularly when it comes to level and world design, Mankind Divided is a textbook example of how it should be done. The main map in Mankind Divided is Prague, which serves as a hub world of sorts. You spend time here between missions and then either go deep into one particular building or a region for a quest, or you fly off somewhere else entirely. Unfortunately, Prague is split into two with a loading screen between the regions. I assume this was for performance reasons, but it's a shame nonetheless, especially on the handful of occasions where missions require you to go back and forth in short succession. Anyway, I don't want to get bogged down in negatives because Prague is a masterpiece of map design. At the start of the game, I ignored the main missions and just went off exploring. It wasn't due to any obsessive need to clear markers off the map, but it was strangely compulsive still. I just couldn't stop. I broke into apartment after apartment, whether it be by hacking the lock, climbing through the window, or finding an open vent on the roof. And then I moved on to the shops, each of which has a basement area that often links to other buildings, and eventually I explored the sewers as well. Story-wise, Adam Jensen has already been in Prague for 6 months when the game starts. By the time I resumed the main quest line, I felt like I'd been there that long too. I'd learned all the little shortcuts, the walls I could jump over and those I couldn't, and even the sewer system. I'd love to see a version of this map that shows every path you can take, including the huge network of vents, tunnels and breakable walls. It is shocking just how many options you have for traversal. Unlike many modern games, you can go inside the vast majority of the buildings you walk past. You can't always go in every room of course, but you can explore enough that the default expectation in any new area is that you will be able to go inside. You're surprised when you can't, not the other way around. Prague excels in two major ways. First, it makes you want to explore by constantly rewarding you through story or loot. Second, it makes the exploration an absolute joy through handcrafted environments that provide shortcuts for whatever augmentations your character happens to have on them. I promise not to bring up Cyberpunk 2077 too much, although it is tempting, and I can't leave it out entirely. Do you remember how the marketing led us to believe that NPCs would all have individual lives and personalities? They would go off and do things independent of the player and all that. Of course, nothing like that was in the final game. Well, Mankind Divided actually does have NPCs with their own lives and personalities. When you break into someone's apartment in Mankind Divided, you'll see traces of lives once lived, and it's here you can properly feel the impact of the new anti-augmented human rules, and begin to actually care about the victims. The police presence on the streets, and the drones flying around, do add to the atmosphere, however they quickly become part of the scenery, and their impact is diminished accordingly. However, uncovering the apartment of an augmented artist struggling to get by really does hit home, as does the augmented programmer who lost their job and now works on an AI system for houses. At first this sort of stuff just feels like flavour text, and there's a temptation to ignore it or lump it in with the sort of sob stories you often find in in-game journals and emails. However, it nearly always ends up being more than that. You find the artist dead later on, and you can interact with the house AI that the programmer is working on in another quest. Oh, and she also seems to be working on another AI program in her spare time. I think it's fair to assume this is a hint at a certain AI which has more relevance to the original games. There's a woman who lost her husband and is clearly struggling to move on. Her emails are tough to read. She's ordering so much alcohol from the local vineyard that they are having trouble meeting her demands, and even recommend she ease off a bit. You see more of the emails when you get inside the winery. A politician has an underground sex and possibly torture dungeon. One guy collects random crap from the city like street signs and stores it on the roof. If you go back later in the game, you'll even find more stuff there. So far this might not sound all that interesting, it's perhaps a slightly improved version of NPCs leaving behind ominous diary entries on their bodies. However, in Mankind Divided, many of those people you encounter, either directly or through their apartment or emails, end up playing a role in side quests later on. For example, one apartment belongs to a stereotypical cat lady, who later witnesses a murder and ends up being quite the personality. Her apartment is ransacked and she escapes through the secret vent that you may well have used to get into her apartment in the first place. The artist's emails show they were trying to negotiate a deal to leave Prague, but you later find their body. People name-checked in these emails sometimes will show up in a completely different location later on. I'm sure I missed a bunch of these because I'm terrible at remembering names, but it's not uncommon to find the other half of email chains hours later. Prague itself is also dynamic. Locations will change later in the game. Certain shops and apartments get vandalised, or apartments you ransacked earlier while empty might have additional loot in them later on, or maybe the owner is even there back from work. Sometimes these changes are dependent on your earlier choices, such as choosing whether to help the Free Press group by getting evidence from the bank. I made that decision relatively early in the game and I didn't expect to see the consequences portrayed quite so vividly in the final act. Even if, like me, you explored nearly the entire city straight away, there will be more to find if you follow the game's points of interest later on. During the final chapter, the city of Prague goes on full lockdown, so you can't be out on the streets at all. This is when all that time spent exploring and learning the map and its shortcuts really pays off. This is kind of a backhanded compliment, but Prague has more personality than all of the game's characters combined. There are a couple of minor niggles that take you out of the moment, such as pedestrians getting stuck in the middle of the road, and shopkeepers always greet you like it's their first time meeting you and will call you a cheapskate even if you spend 15,000 credits in their shop. These moments are outliers though. I'd argue that these little stories and snippets are reason enough to explore, but the game throws plenty more tangible rewards at you as well. Everything from supplies to XP for finding new areas to even praxis kits in some of the harder to reach spots. When it comes to looting, I like to think of myself as a fairly thorough player. Claiming free stuff is one area of life in which I can actually be patient. In very British imperialistic fashion, I would enter a new place and take everything of value with me. Or so I thought. Turns out some of the loot is really well hidden. One of Jensen's augmentations is Smart Vision, which you can upgrade to show you hidden items of value. Once I started using that, I realised just how much I'd been missing out on. There's a hidden ceiling in the limb clinic that has a praxis kit for a start. I'd been in here a bunch of times without spotting that. Crafting parts in particular are often tucked under other worthless but movable items and are easily missed. Smart Vision also shows up secrets like hidden switches which unlock rooms or safes. The cleaning supply company has a room you can access by interacting with a spray bottle. Likewise, you can interact with toys, paintings or traditional buttons under desks. I would have missed many of these secrets without that ability, although it should be noted that you don't have to use it. Clues to hidden switches can also be found in emails and the like, or there are simply alternative ways into that secret area. Emails and pocket secretaries often give you key codes, however it is quite common for the lock in question to be somewhere else entirely, like one of the many storage lockers dotted throughout the city, and sometimes you'll get told the location of a keycard instead of being given the key code. It's a small step up from having the code and the lock in close proximity, which is what many games do. The best loot is the corporate vault keys. There's a bank in Prague that has a hidden corporate vault with 3 storage areas for 3 different clients. As far as I know, you can only access these vaults with the keycard, although it wouldn't surprise me if there was in fact another way to do it. These keycards are well hidden. For example, one is in a random apartment in a safe that is itself tucked away behind a painting. You need to interact with a camera to access it. These vaults contain a lot of goodies including praxis kits and expensive ammo. Plus the VersaLife and Taeyong medical ones in particular contain some nice hints to wider story and links to the original games. Of course, even with the keycards, the corporate vaults aren't easy to access. You need a special keycard to use the lift and to access the 3rd floor, unless you find the secret route in through the underground parking garage that is. I think this is a great example of how good the map design can be. You would never find this secret entrance by looking at the elevator for nearby vents or for just trying to find a way underground from the main bank. We're a long way now from the days of Invisible War, where the alternative route was simply next to the locked door. The underground garage is officially off limits, but there are a few ways you can sneak in, such as through a vent in the above garden or through a route from a nearby shop. Once inside, you have to sneak around guards and cameras, which can be turned off from the nearby security room, and then make your way through a large fan, which needs to be deactivated first. Once through, you drop down a few levels and are presented with a high security door that you need either maximum hacking ability to get through or a multi-tool. Once through here, you'll be in the vaults and you can access any of the ones you have a keycard for. Weirdly, I found these vaults incredibly early in my playthrough. I hadn't been looking for them or looking for much of anything really. I just kept following paths and found myself underground in front of a bunch of lasers. I didn't have keycards at the time or really understand where the hell I was, so I just made a mental note of it and came back later. The story and loot reward you for exploring every nook and cranny of Prague. However, I would have likely done this anyway because navigation is so much fun in its own right. My main playthrough was a no-kill ghost run, so I focused on augmentations for hacking and movement. The city responded by opening up more options than I could use in 3 playthroughs. At a basic level, if you can hack, you can obviously open doors. If you can jump high, you can reach ledges. If you can lift heavy objects, you can move them and uncover hidden vents. All stuff we've seen before in previous games. However, Mankind Divided goes further than any of the previous entries in the sheer number and variety of ways it utilises your skills and provides options to those without the obvious ability required to get past an obstacle. For example, even though I could jump high, I couldn't necessarily reach every ledge I wanted to access. I could go the old school route and start piling large boxes in the street and use that to get there, but I could also use my biotech skill to open an awning to jump on first, or even activate a previously inaccessible ladder. Or I could use a biocell to power up a scissor lift to take a somewhat more mundane journey to the roof. When you spot a window ledge or a rooftop you want to access, it's not so much a case of how do you get up there, as it is which option will you choose for how to get up there. Traversal between these ledges and rooftops is also satisfying because there's little to no guesswork as to what you can and cannot grab hold of. If the game wants you to take a certain path, it will likely provide a sensible way to do it. While you can take weird routes balancing on small ledges or piling up boxes, the game generally doesn't want you to guess. If there's a route, you'll probably see it, but not in a really obvious yellow ledge kind of way. Clemence Mora at Eidos Montreal gave a GDC presentation on rewarding exploration in Mankind Divided, and she made it clear she didn't want players to have to do things like awkwardly balance on flower pots or small ledges to get from A to B, because she felt that took away from the immersion. She mentions how she deleted about 100 balconies from Prague to make sure there were no superfluous ones that would clutter the map. Providing clear paths isn't about making the game easier as such, it's about improving the flow and making it so you can smoothly get from one part of the map to the other without having to stop and think too often. Now, admittedly, the running and jumping mechanics aren't ever good enough for this to feel like natural parkour, but they do elicit similar feelings of freedom and a general sense of ownership over the city. This is your home, you know all its little shortcuts and routes. I did find a couple of glitches that spoiled the moment a bit, such as when I leapt down onto a pedestrian bridge and was somehow walked down into the metro station for an ID check, and the game sometimes forces Jensen into this small hop instead of a big jump. I think it's doing it because it thinks you want to climb on a small ledge, but if you're actually trying to make a bigger leap, well, it can really mess things up. As good as the navigation generally is, one slight problem is that it can feel a bit too much at times. I mentioned earlier how I spent hours exploring the city and randomly stumbled upon the corporate vault. While I consider that a positive experience overall, it should be noted that a lot of the exploration felt almost accidental. It's great that you can stroll into a winery and end up in a corporate vault, but I didn't intend any of it. I just kept following paths. I'd hack a locked door in a shop and end up in the basement where I'd hack some more doors, maybe find a vent and move on to another building. And then I'll have a choice between exiting in that building or carrying on, which in turn might lead up to a few new levels or even down into the sewer system from where you can go basically anywhere. There are so many options that it can become overwhelming. I'm getting overwhelmed even speaking and thinking about it again. At times it can feel less like an intricately designed map and more a random network of vents and hidden paths. Except that's not really a fair comment. The more you play, the more you realise just how much thought went into Prague's map design. It's not random in any way. A great test is to play without all the movement and hacking abilities and force yourself to rely on more traditional methods of exploration. You can still get in all the apartments and hidden rooms, it just takes more effort and patience, like waiting to find a key code or a random clue on the back of a picture or exiting the sewers in the right spot. Prague is definitely the star of the show in Deus Ex Mankind Divided, however it's only a hub world and you spend significant time elsewhere, or at least off the streets. Those other maps incorporate the same ideas but often on a smaller scale. Importantly, you can still ghost through levels sight unseen. In fact, the possibilities are so impressive that I ended up being disappointed with minor transgressions like having to knock out a single enemy with a tranq gun, or even needing to sneak close by them. Seriously, it got to the point where I was genuinely annoyed at myself for successfully sneaking through a room with enemies in, because, even though no one saw me, I had put myself at risk when I didn't have to, as would become apparent when I found an even better route after the fact. I remember sneaking around a train station using tried and true tactics like hiding behind cover and moving when the enemy's back was turned. I knew there had to be a better way, and after using smart vision, I found a well hidden vent under an overturned vending machine. I moved the vending machine and crawled through the vent. This took me most of the way, but to get to the final room I had to either distract or shoot a guard who was looking in my direction. That wasn't at all difficult, so I knocked him out and grabbed the mission item. Before going back the way I came, I found an even better route that would have taken me directly into the final room without getting close to any enemies. This happened a lot. Whenever I thought I'd been clever by being undetected, I was quickly disavowed of that notion and made to feel rather stupid by the presence of an even better route. My favourite example can be seen in one of the bank missions. The bank is a prominent part of Prague and is an excellent map in its own right, and yet remarkably you don't actually need to go in there for the main story. In addition to the corporate vaults, there's a mission to grab some evidence for an underground media outlet, which is a side quest, and another heist of sorts, which, while is technically in the main story, it's still optional because you can opt to do another mission instead. It says something about the overall quality of the map design on offer that the developers felt confident in letting you skip a brilliant bank heist mission. As you would expect, the bank is heavily guarded with lasers, cameras and turrets in addition to the regular security guards. Plus there are robots that will spring to life if alarms are tripped. Crucially though, it doesn't feel over the top. I didn't fully appreciate the bank level until I played some of the inferior DLC levels, which went way overboard with all the security in the buildings. The bank level on paper has a relatively modest number of guards patrolling and cameras that are relatively easy to avoid on their own. However, between them they cover enough of the ground that it becomes really quite hard to navigate. I mean that in a good way. The camera locations and the guard routes are deliberate and thoughtful. Now compare this to the DLC maps, which are just absolutely chock full of guards, cameras, turrets, robots and armoured guards, with no thought put into their placement, all the while stripping you of your augments and resources. I'm glad I played the DLC, if solely for the reminder of how hard it can be to make levels like the bank feel natural. More on the DLC later though. The bank is a joy to explore. There are the usual vents to move through, passwords to find and doors to hack, but you can't just move through on autopilot. For example, you can get an access card by breaking into an office and talking to the guy in charge over instant messenger, but you need to respond appropriately during the conversation or he'll get suspicious. The clues to what you should say are on other computers and not necessarily that obvious. For example, it's easy to gloss over a seemingly random email which mentions that the person you're going to later pretend to be is supposed to be on annual leave. The crucial information isn't shoved in your face or highlighted in your journal. I also love how you can freely snoop around offices once inside by activating the switch to turn on the mirrored glass. While not part of the mission, the bank has a bunch of customer safes, not the same as the large corporate vaults, which you can loot if you have the key codes or other skills. Anyway, I made it to the manager's office having only knocked out one guard and otherwise being completely unseen. And then I found the much better option which would have let me skip huge chunks of the map and be a complete ghost in the process. This other route looked frustratingly easy at first, although it does seem to require a couple of good orgs like Icarus Dash to use it effectively. In fact, Mankind Divided isn't afraid of the player missing large parts of levels, or even taking what might seem like an incredibly easy route to the end. During an early mission in the bookstore, I wasn't exactly sure where to go and ended up making things way too complicated when it turned out all I needed to do was follow the obvious path up to the next level and head towards the even more obvious bright light to skip all of the enemy interactions and most of the bookstore. As for the levels outside of Prague, the Org Detention Centre known as Golem City is quite small and suffocating when you look around horizontally and move around on a singular level. However, there's a lot of vertical room which you can take advantage of. Weirdly though, while in Golem City you're supposed to find a secret location called The Throat, or at least it's supposed to be secret. It's actually labelled in the elevator. The final level is relatively restrictive again, but it is visually impressive and you can do that hiding in plain sight thing, taking out agents in the open. Shooting people with a massive tranquilizer rifle should probably attract more attention than it does, but I didn't mind. I didn't particularly enjoy the opening Dubai map. This is sort of a tutorial map, but you also have a large selection of augmentations, so it simultaneously throws you in at the deep end. It forces you into tutorials while also giving you the freedom to do as you choose, and I don't think the two quite mesh. It's also visually messy and just a rather weird way to start the game. It's possible or even likely that Dubai wasn't always the tutorial level. In addition to some of the tutorials feeling slightly awkward in their execution and the player being expected to use a full suite of Jensen's augmentations and weapons right away, there is a specific shooting gun range tutorial for the weapons in Prague, but by this point you would have already used the guns quite a lot, so it feels kind of pointless, unless it's in the wrong place. My suspicion is that the opening was initially going to be in Prague, and perhaps quite slow paced with the player left to explore at their leisure. Someone then decided that they needed to throw players into the action a bit quicker, and so Dubai was moved to the start. Anyway, with the exception of a couple of mediocre levels, most of your time in Mankind Divided is spent moving through carefully crafted maps that beg to be thoroughly explored and even replayed. I did the 2 missions that take place in the bank, and I visited it a bunch for the safes and vaults, and yet I haven't seen all of it. It wasn't until I did the bank heist mission a second time to deliberately take the harder route to the vault that I saw all the lasers and security guarding the area that I had previously been accessing via a ventilation shaft from an underground parking garage. And within that new route there were multiple ways to get through sight unseen, such as switching off lasers or avoiding them through vents or the false ceiling. All this talk of level design and optional routes makes one big assumption, namely that you care about being subtle. In traditional series fashion, the game caters to those who also want to play all guns blazing, and the shooting is better than it's ever been. Sure, the level design might be more focused on those who want to avoid combat, but the skills and weapons provide an adequate alternative. Combat mechanics have changed slightly from Human Revolution. With the default control scheme on PC, you now stick to cover at the press of the F button instead of holding down the right mouse button. In my Human Revolution video I mentioned how I loved the system of holding a button to hide because it made the whole thing more fluid. With sticky cover systems you tend to get, stuck to it and can't always move away in an intuitive manner. Now that said, I can see why this system isn't so good if you are shooting your way through. Aiming typically uses the right mouse button, so having a separate dedicated cover button is probably the way to go. Unfortunately, this cover system doesn't work that well. It can be hard to judge exactly where Jensen will end up when, say, trying to dash between cover or dash into cover, and I found he often stopped just short. A minor niggle is that if you have a controller plugged into your PC, then the on-screen prompts will be for that controller, even if you are clearly using a mouse and keyboard. Combat feels good though. I'll always favour stealth as a primary playstyle, however the shooting is more than fun enough to justify a second action-focused playthrough. While the weapon choice is not spectacular, you can customise weapons for each scenario and change things like fire rate and ammo type on the fly. The camera awkwardly focuses on the weapon when you change things up in the field, which can take you out of the moment a bit during hectic firefights, but overall it's fun to switch up the ammo depending on the target. The ammo variety also creates more opportunities to strategise. Large robots and turrets take a lot of ammo to destroy. Armour piercing ammo is obviously more effective, but it's also rarer and more expensive. Instead you could use EMP ammo to temporarily disable it and then run away at the risk of having to deal with it again if you come back. Or in the case of large brutes with mechanical armour, you can disable the armour with EMP ammo and then do a melee takedown. You can also improvise a bit by doing things like dragging a guard's dead body through the laser grid to avoid setting off the alarm. All very Splinter Cell. There are a lot of combat augmentations now. Strangely, there are 2 armour augmentations, one of which is passive while the other drains bioenergy. This is probably overkill, and the vague descriptions don't help you identify which is a better investment of your skill points. In addition to crucial but kind of boring improvements to aim, recoil and reload speed, you can get cool stuff like slow time, enemy tracking, a concussive blast called Peps, the Typhoon ability that shoots out a bunch of mini rockets, electricity bolts and a dash ability for quick movement. Those last 2 are also useful for stealth playthroughs, although the dash ability is nowhere near as good as the similar blink ability in Dishonored. It's really hard to judge exactly where you will end up, and even though there is a little indicator to tell you when you'll grab hold of a ledge after the dash, I found it to be incredibly unreliable. There are only a couple of times you really need the extra distance beyond your regular jump, so it's not an aug I recommend prioritising. One augmentation I really enjoyed was remote hacking, which lets you interact with electronics from a distance. In addition to messing around with cameras and turrets, you can lift security barriers from windows to open up new routes, deactivate lasers, or just mess with TVs to distract guards. I tend to associate an action approach with a lethal one and stealth with non-lethal, however that doesn't have to be the case. Stealth takedowns can be violent, throwable nano blades deal death from the shadows. Even augmentations like the Typhoon ability have non-lethal variants, so you can stand in the middle of a crowd, fire off a bunch of explosives and not kill anyone. Conversely, murder doesn't have to be noisy. You can apply silencers to most guns, including the combat rifle. Mankind Divided adds in an interesting twist to character builds with the experimental augmentations. These are new augs that Jensen got during the period between Human Revolution and this game. He doesn't know how he got them. Experimental augmentations have an associated overclocking system of sorts, so for every special augmentation you activate you have to deactivate another, otherwise you risk overheating. I think this is a good way of giving the player access to the game's most powerful abilities early on, without having to worry about them becoming too overpowered by picking them all. Many games make you wait until the end of a skill tree to get the best abilities, with the presumption being that you won't unlock them until near the end of the game. And you won't be able to unlock multiple of them because that would mean going through multiple skill trees. This makes a lot of sense from a balance perspective. The problem is that those powerful abilities are often really fun to use and you don't get much time with them. Mankind Divided's approach lets you unlock the game's best powers from the start, but limits how many of them you can unlock. It lets you choose a few more near the end for good measure. Eidos Montreal even went to the effort of incorporating these new skills into the story, which I appreciated. Let's face it, they didn't need to bother. Few people would have batted an eyelid if the tech dude just said he had some new augs in store. Speaking of balance, as much as I enjoy non-lethal stealthy playthroughs, the modern Deus Ex games haven't been well balanced around that approach, and the harder difficulties don't make much of a difference. I played on Give Me Deus Ex, which is the hardest difficulty available at the start. I never asked for this is the same but with permadeath. Unfortunately, 99% of the time I could have been playing on easy for all the difference it made. The problem with giving players the option to ghost through levels is that ghosting inherently avoids all the threats the game presents. The only challenge is therefore in finding the ghost routes. As discussed, I did miss a lot of the best routes at first, so it's not like this is especially easy, but even without finding the very best route all the time, I only rarely engaged with the threats, and it didn't take much more than a tranquilizer dart, which is even effective through some armour. Another issue when playing stealthily is that the entire resource element of the game becomes largely meaningless. You could probably complete the game without picking anything up beyond story items. You don't really need a gun of any kind technically. I defeated the final boss with a shot from my tranq rifle before rushing in for a melee takedown, however he has a kill switch you can use instead. I love that this is an option. It reminds me of how I took out Gunther Hermann in the first game. Shame I didn't find it until after the boss fight though. Let's assume that you do carry a gun and a few darts. The tranq rifle has very few upgrade options, so you won't spend many crafting parts before maxing it out. Once you've done that, you'll have an almost unlimited supply of anything you can craft, like multi-tools, biocells or nanoblades, because every gun and ammo box you find can be broken down into a generous amount of crafting parts. I opted to spend a lot of skill points on hacking, but I could have probably just settled for getting to say level 3ish, and then just use multi-tools for the higher level locks. I would never have been short of multi-tools. Likewise, biocells initially seemed quite limited and I deliberately avoided augmentations that use bioenergy. However, after a couple of hours breaking down weapons and ammo, you have enough crafting parts that it ceases to become a worry. On top of this, there are some augmentations that should probably be removed or at least trimmed down. I don't often say things like this because I don't think it's a player's responsibility to set their own restrictions when a game is badly balanced, but I would recommend you avoid the invisibility augmentation and probably don't upgrade the scanner. Invisibility has been a staple of the franchise since the first game, however the subsequent games turn this already powerful tool into almost a cheat mode of sorts. In the first Deus Ex you could unlock cloaking with a body augmentation, although augmentations were separate from general skills and the augmentation canisters were quite rare. You then had to choose between cloaking that was effective against organic enemies versus machine enemies, you couldn't have both. Plus bioenergy didn't regenerate, so you had to use consumables to replenish it after use. The sequel and now the prequels don't distinguish between organics and machines, and Human Revolution and Mankind Divided both have regenerating bioenergy meters. This makes it easy to use the cloak for, say, a short sprint between hiding spots where you wait for it to regenerate and then repeat. Or you could just spam biocells since they're cheap to make now. I really wish the prequel games didn't have cloaking at all. In addition to it being too powerful, it's actually better than it is in the original games, which take place in the future, so that is kind of weird. As for the scanner, you really don't need to see exact vision cones for every enemy. It's kind of obvious anyway if you look around you, and you don't want your eyes glued to a minimap all the time when the environments look so good. I feel bad for criticising the difficulty of the stealth mode because I don't have any great solutions, and I certainly don't want Eidos Montreal to take away all the cool secret paths that help you avoid enemies. And those secrets can only be so hard to spot before they become obtuse. I don't want these games to turn into some sort of pixel hunting nightmare where I have to find the exact right can of beer to squeeze to open a hidden door or something. There are some features that make the game easier that I absolutely love. For example, say you set off an alarm for failing to hack a door's lock. The police get summoned to investigate, but they won't shoot you on sight because they don't know who triggered the alarm. If you leave the room quickly before they arrive, the police remain clueless and eventually go back to normal. This means there's often not much risk in failing the hacking challenges, but it adds so much to making the city feel real that I wouldn't want to get rid of it. And then there are the bosses. Jensen can talk his way out of most major fights, either by convincing the other person to stand down or by occasionally using a kill code. There is a special augmentation to help you select the correct response when trying to persuade people. It gives you loads of information on their personality and what they might react to, but ultimately it just comes down to looking at which of the three lights representing Alpha, Beta and Omega beeps the most during conversation. Again, this definitely makes things easier, but I wouldn't want to get rid of it, even if there are other non-lethal takedown options available during combat, which there are. Eidos Montreal definitely learned their lesson from Human Revolution on the boss front. Mankind Divided tries to add challenge to the stealth by having enemies spot you quickly, sometimes really quickly. Those stealth bars can fill up so fast that you barely notice the yellow warning stage before it goes red. Other times they don't. I assume there are multiple factors at play to determine how quickly enemies go hostile once spotting you, like noise, lighting, distance, etc. Usually it feels fair though. Let's be honest, most games make enemies way too stupid when it comes to getting suspicious about the dude they saw crouch walking between two barrels. There were a few cheap moments. I was somehow spotted through this grill in the door, which really shouldn't have been possible. I wasn't making any noise and the nearest enemy was walking away from me when suddenly everyone switched to hostile. Mostly though, you can't have too many complaints when you're caught. I want to keep focusing on the more positive aspects of the game, so I'm going to do something unusual and talk about the side quests before the main story, because my favourite missions were all optional, and they typically had stronger writing as well. Mankind Divided doesn't do a great job talking about its bigger themes and major characters, but it excels at the smaller moments. One of my favourites was Neon Nights, which sees Jensen track down a new illegal drug that's killing some of its users. There's nothing particularly original about that, I suppose, although there was a slight twist in that the drug was only killing those with neuropozyne in their systems, thereby adding to the misery endured by augmented humans in this world. What I really enjoyed was the mission design. At one point you need to infiltrate an underground rave, which requires a special keycard to enter. This being Deus Ex, there are a couple of ways around this, such as by blowing open the door or smashing through a large vent. However, blowing things up wasn't my style and I didn't have the right augmentation to get through the vent yet. I needed the key, and the way you obtain said key is kind of genius. You need to pick up on hints that a cleaning company is involved in neon distribution, and then find a particularly messy apartment and ask the house AI, the same AI designed by the augmented programmer whose apartment we've also broken into, to hire a cleaner for the house. If you return to the house later, you'll find it clean and tidy with a towel in the shape of a swan on the bed. Investigate the towel and you find the key to the rave. You miss all this if you were to just blow the door open. I love how little hand-holding there was for this mission. Now, admittedly, it took me a while to figure out, and I spent more time than I care to mention trying to figure out a route into the rave via the sewers, but I still appreciate the lengths required to get the key. Later on, you head to the drug lab itself and can dismantle the entire operation and then leave without anyone realising you've even been there. Another side mission gets triggered by running into a fake police checkpoint and then sees you tracking down a forger making fake IDs. A couple of locals need these IDs to get past security, but you can only actually activate one of them. The other person gets rounded up and sent to Gollum City with other augmented humans, and you can bump into them when you go there later. There's an underground religious cult where the leader stops you using any speech-related augmentations or even from challenging him through dialogue. You can still select Jensen's response, but he would always say something passive and agreeable instead.
I think you're the one who's harming these people.
As you can see, I'm not harming anyone. I know you believe.
I was able to unlock some high security doors and take out the leader stealthily. In doing so, I missed a huge part of the mission, which would have seen me meet up with someone above ground and tamper with the transmitters, keeping everyone subdued. Missions like this, and the neon drug one, show that the game doesn't limit your choice or options to small predefined areas. You might expect all your options to be confined to the relatively small area that the religious group is based in, and then you would limit your search accordingly. It never really occurred to me to leave the area and go above ground and seek help elsewhere. I was just lucky I had the hacking skill to get to the leader's site unseen. I've already mentioned the side mission that has you sneaking into a bank to get evidence for a media group. I still cannot believe this quest is optional. If you don't do it, you not only miss a great bank heist, you miss a second mission later on where the group needs help getting to safety after the city goes on lockdown. There's also a murder mystery for good measure, and you can absolutely make a mess of this one. There are lots of clues to find or miss, and you can jump to rash conclusions if you think you have all the evidence you need. I ended up having to fight the culprit because I didn't properly follow through on a lead, and I missed the chance to get her deactivation code. I'm kicking myself for not getting that code, and I think it shows how many games just have us following instructions in the quest log and not actually thinking for ourselves. The main witness in the case is seemingly kidnapped, and Jensen investigates her house for clues. If you're on autopilot here, you of course focus on what might have happened to her. However, if you stop and think for a bit, you might notice that she has a telescope pointing directly at the entrance to your apartment, which is kind of weird. And there's an email on her computer from her doctor who pleads with her to talk to someone and get help. Okay, this is me coming in later in the editing process. Unfortunately, there are going to be a few moments here and there where I don't have video footage to match what I'm saying. I lost about 8.5 hours worth of footage due to the way my recording software decided to capture the second monitor for some reason. It's never done that before. I have no reason why it suddenly started doing it. I actually went back to record the footage again. Like I found old save files and then kind of went back. And it still actually recorded the second monitor sometimes. Not all the time, just sometimes. Anyway, there's some stuff like I couldn't replicate, or I just was like, I'm not going to go back a third time and do it for the exact same section. So there's going to be a few little bits where maybe the footage doesn't match up. Sorry about that. Had I used a bit of common sense, I could have gone to see the doctor because he's a real person in the world with a real shop you can visit. And I would have realised that the witness was actually the killer, and I could have gotten her kill code. This mission had a few weird moments, such as when I had to find a medical report in a guy's apartment to prove he had augmented hands and therefore couldn't have been the killer, except I just had a conversation with him and his augmented hands were very clearly visible. Perhaps the guy was a late addition and devs forgot to adjust dialogue choices accordingly or something. With hindsight, I should have turned the waypoint markers off a lot earlier. Mankind Divided places a lot of pertinent information in your journal, so you never have to follow markers to get to where you need to go. When giving out quests, NPCs tell you the address or let you know where a place is with reference to notable landmarks. The only slight issue here is that Prague is very built up, and so you can rarely see that far in front of you. When navigating, I had to check the map a lot for directions. Still, that's better than just following an on-screen marker most of the time. Okay, I can't put off discussing the story any longer. I'm going to give a very short summary to make sure we're all on the same page. It genuinely won't take that long because bugger all happens, but if you do want to skip ahead, there's a timestamp on screen now. Mankind Divided starts 2 years after the events of Human Revolution, and while the specifics of your ending choices there don't really end up mattering all that much, the major event at the end, where Darrow flipped the switch and sent every augmented human into an uncontrollable rage, does effectively form the basis of the world in the sequel. This is actually a great start. I hate it when games gloss over the major events of their predecessors to avoid alienating new players. It's largely downhill from here though. Jensen was rescued from Panchaea, but much of his time between the games is unaccounted for. DLC fills in a few gaps, as does the tie-in novel Black Light, but even with all that, the gap is still unsatisfying. In true video game tradition of ignoring the underlying messages behind popular genres, Mankind Divided has Jensen working with the authorities to crack down on a rebellion. Now that's cyberpunk. Okay, he is also working with a group known as the Juggernaut Collective, run by a mysterious figure known as Janus, but that doesn't change how you spend most of your time playing as an authority figure and acting accordingly. The introduction sees you nearly die twice in terrorist attacks, which is another reason why I'm convinced the Dubai section was added late. In Dubai, you're attacked by a group of augmented humans who steal a bunch of weapons, and almost immediately after, you're nearly killed in a train station bombing, again committed by augmented humans. The party responsible for both acts, is the Augmented Rights Coalition, or ARC. The leader of ARC, a man called Rucker, denies involvement and is promptly killed. A splinter group within Ark, led by Marchenko, takes over Ark and sends it down an increasingly violent path, all at the behest of the Illuminati, including the infamous figure of Bob Page. Jensen is almost killed after following a lead to the Swiss Alps, where Marchenko injects him with a deadly drug called Orchid. Jensen survives the drug, presumably for the same reason he doesn't need neuropozyne. His body is just wired slightly differently. Following all this violence from Ark, the Prague authorities decide to put the city into lockdown, which makes it illegal to be outside. Marchenko plans to kill a guy called Nathaniel Brown and other people lobbying for something called the Human Restoration Act, or HRA, which would segregate augmented humans. This law is also backed by the Illuminati, who in traditional fashion are kind of fanning the flames from both ends. There are a few different endings, but I was able to save Brown and arrest Marchenko, which is probably considered the best ending. The HRA doesn't pass. We find out that the Illuminati is tracking Jensen because they believe Jensen will lead them to Janus, the leader of the Juggernaut Collective, and he likely will. And that's about it. Mankind Divided's story was widely criticised on launch for being too short and ending too abruptly. Both complaints are valid to a point, although it's not quite that straightforward. You certainly can complete the main game quickly if you want. That's always been the case with the Deus Ex games to a certain extent, although the original is a lot harder to just power through simply because you're a lot more vulnerable. The thing is, with how good the side quests are and how cool it is to explore Prague, I have to question why anyone would want to power through the main story. And if you do, you know you've powered through the main story, so it seems kind of unfair to then say the game is too short. I spent just over 30 hours with the main game before the DLC. Admittedly, I did do basically everything, and my stealth approach is slower than going in all guns blazing. Still, those were 30 very enjoyable hours. You could probably stretch it to 40 hours if you played a bit slower, though I'm not sure how you'd go beyond that in a single playthrough. As discussed, the side quests are great. Yeah, you don't have to do them to beat the story, but it's weird to go into a game like this and deliberately ignore them. And of course, Mankind Divided is made for multiple playthroughs, and I don't say that lightly. I rarely replay games. Off the top of my head, I'm not sure I've ever beaten a New Game Plus mode. There are some games where I wouldn't mind playing a little more of them after completion, but 99 times out of 100 I'd rather play a new game from my backlog. That said, I don't really consider Mankind Divided to be completed after just one run. There's so much more than you can experience from just one playthrough. So yes, you can beat the main story quickly, you just shouldn't. As for the abrupt ending, well, I've never seen anything like it. You complete a mission, have a nice little chat with Brown and mention how there's more work to be done, and you know what, I'm just going to let it play out.
You and your guests need to get out of Apex Center now, Brown. Slater's dead. Tarvos is compromised. They've come to stop you. Can you get everyone to the helipad?
Yes, of course. My security team will escort us, but what about the other attendees?
TF-29 will evacuate them. I'm going after the people who did this.
Then you have a long way to climb.
I'd heard the rumours about the abrupt ending before playing, but nothing prepared me for this. I was genuinely open-mouthed in shock when the New Game Plus screen popped up. I cannot believe they ended the game this way. Thing is, it really didn't have to be this bad. The problem is mainly a presentation thing. After that New Game Plus screen, you do get a lengthy cutscene showing you the consequences of your actions, plus post-credit scenes for good measure. Had the New Game Plus screen come after all of that, it would have been far less shocking. It's so jarring to throw it up like that, and I have no idea why it's included before the actual ending cutscene, which would have kind of eased you into the idea that the game was drawing to a close. Anyway, the story is still unsatisfying. The fight with Marchenko reminded me of the first boss fight from Human Revolution, and defeating him felt like the first step of many, not the last. Marchenko is just another minion, much like, say, Barrett from the first game. There's simply no satisfaction in defeating him. The story is more like what you'd get from an expansion or a large piece of DLC, not what you want in the main game. It's simply not important enough. Jim Sterling has a video that pretty much confirms the game was chopped in two, and you can tell. Technically there is a full arc here, you can call it a complete story if you like, and I won't argue. However, it's an unsatisfying story and not fitting of being a major entry between Human Revolution and Deus Ex. It's like if the Missing Link DLC had somehow been stretched into an entire game. Your major accomplishment here is stopping the deaths of some bad politicians who you don't really like. I mean, yeah, break out the champagne, I guess. Of course, you can't expect every plot thread to get wrapped up when there are clearly more games planned in the series. That's fine. However, the problem here is that the plot threads brought forward from Human Revolution barely go anywhere. You check in a few times with Sarif to no avail, you learn nothing of note about Janus or the wider group, you're still working for Interpol and only helping the Juggernaut Collective in secret. The Dubai prologue sets up an enemy faction wearing these distinctive gold masks, and yet they barely feature again. And when they do, it's notably in missions that feel really detached from the main game, such as the mission in the Swiss Alps and then the final mission. Mind you, I did like how you could spot that the gold mask guys had replaced the real guards, if you sort of snuck around and found their masks hidden under their desks. Oh, and there's a silly twist where the psychiatrist Jensen works with turns out to be a mole. This is spectacularly predictable. You bump into her using her boss's computer at one point and she keeps saying stuff like, "We should probably get out of here before Miller gets back," and it's just so obvious she's up to something. Jensen can put pressure on her a bit, but then he just forgets all about it. There's also a cool link where that press group you might have worked with is set up to become Silhouette in the future. Silhouette is the group that works with Nicolette Declaire and indirectly the Illuminati. Probably not what the founders really intended. The game presents a couple of major mission choices which I quite liked. I've already mentioned how you can opt to skip the second bank mission entirely. However, in the final mission you are forced to choose between confronting Marchenko or saving the politicians. What I loved about how this worked is that you can actually do both if you're quick enough, but the game doesn't tell you. After finishing one mission, you can then go on and do the other. So in my case, I defeated Marchenko and then went to find Brown. I expected to be too late and to find them all dead, but you actually have about 10 minutes or a few more if you found an enzyme that neutralises the orchid poison, to then reach Brown and save the day here as well. There's no official timer on screen. It's one of those rare times where a game is telling you to hurry, but it actually means it. It's not just like a cheap attempt to make you feel under pressure, it's real. You can tell a game has a disappointing story when fans feel the need to come up with a theory hinting at a better one. Unlike the indoctrination theory for Mass Effect 3, the Adam Jensen clone theory is actually plausible. Essentially, given the convenient gap in the story plus some memory loss and Jensen's new augmentations, people think Jensen is actually a clone of the original Jensen. Certainly clone technology is a thing in the Deus Ex universe, although this might be a little too early in the timeline for it to be real. The major problem with this theory though is that it's simply not interesting. Who cares? Jensen's mind was moved to a different body. Okay, and? Like, it doesn't change anything. It might hint at more interesting stuff to happen in the third game, but it doesn't help the story in this one at all. I found the overall story fairly dull, but at least it wasn't offensive, which is unfortunately a problem with other parts of the game due to insensitive handling of its core theme of oppression. In Mankind Divided, augmented humans are persecuted because of the rampage 2 years ago. Eidos Montreal thought it would be a good idea to compare this fictional treatment to real-world struggles and to co-opt the language of those movements. This started in the advertising campaign, but the slogan is in the game, as is a lot of language familiar to real-life racial struggles. Most notable was the use of the phrase "Org Lives Matter," an unsubtle reference to Black Lives Matter. It shouldn't need saying, but you can't just take a slogan like Black Lives Matter and then change the subject. It's why different minority groups use different slogans, for example, "Stop Asian Hate," not "Asian Lives Matter." Changing the subject matter is akin to using phrases like "All Lives Matter." While Mankind Divided was released before the 2020 Black Lives Matter movement, Black Lives Matter was very much already a thing. The phrase "All Lives Matter" was not just an unfortunate coincidence. The game and promotional materials also use the phrase "mechanical apartheid," which is terrible for similar reasons. For those who don't know, apartheid is an Afrikaans word meaning separateness, and in English is usually used to mean separation on the basis of race. You do sometimes see people use apartheid with another qualifier to mean a different type of separateness, such as gender apartheid, but you should certainly be cautious in how you use it. Despite its broader meaning, there can be no doubt as to what the word apartheid refers to in everyday conversation and where it comes from, namely a period of white supremacy in South Africa that divided the population based on race and led to terrible suffering for the black population, the after effects of which are still felt today. You can't just casually throw around the word apartheid in the same way you don't casually throw around Holocaust. It conjures particular images and events that go way beyond the strict dictionary definition of what the word means. Square Enix doubled down on mechanical apartheid in the marketing, even creating a live action video to show how much augmented people suffer in this fictional world. The insensitive use of language might not have been quite so bad had the comparison between the real world groups and the fictional one not been so misplaced. It is true that in the game augmented people were persecuted based on the fact that they are augmented, and not necessarily because they've done anything wrong. However, they were all privileged individuals who chose to get body augmentations, and those augmentations did actually lead to real world problems and what the game describes as the worst single loss of life in history. It could happen again. It's feasible. There is a basis for the fear. This in no way compares to discrimination on the basis of race. You do not choose your skin colour, and there is no justification for treating people differently based on skin colour. To insinuate that these issues are on the same level is shocking, or at least it should be. A good example of how bad the comparison is can be found in the words of the game's own art director Jacques Belletet. In an interview with Polygon, he stated that the dev team does not take a side in the debate. He wants players to weigh up the pros and cons to see if the augmented people deserve their treatment. Now, can you imagine saying anything even remotely similar about Black Lives Matter or South African apartheid? Hopefully not, which just illustrates how bad Mankind Divided's attempted comparison is. Mankind Divided and Human Revolution, to a certain extent, both struggle to make up their mind about who augmented humans really are. We know that augmentations were expensive, and so generally they were bought by rich people. However, the game wants to portray them as a victimised group of downtrodden individuals, without making much effort to explain their downfall beyond a neuropozyne shortage, which doesn't really fit with the existing story because the whole point of neuropozyne was its ability to create a dependency. It was supposed to be expensive, not completely unobtainable. This feels like a very convenient change someone has added in here to explain why these rich people are suddenly now all poor and struggling. Jacques Belletet tries to compare this situation to taking anti-rejection drugs after an organ transplant, but this again is a bad comparison. People get organ transplants for genuine medical need, not for superpowers. The fact that the developers continuously come up with terrible justifications for their approach only serves to make them look worse. And let's not forget that many augmented people are physically powerful, certainly more powerful than the average human. They could actually fight back here. They don't feel anything like an oppressed group in the real world. As for how all this plays out in game, well, until the lockdown you're free to go anywhere because of your status with Interpol. You will see augmented humans abused by police, however there's not much you can do to change that. Even if you take out the police officers doing it, the citizens hang around and wait for another one to show up. Their suffering is used as window dressing. In the metro stations you have to use the AUG-only cars at the back. If you don't, you then have to show your papers when you get out at the other end. The security checks aren't exactly thorough. They often put their thumb over your picture while examining the ID for a start. Anyway, as consequences go, it's not all that significant. It might have been more interesting if there was always a queue to go through the augmented line, and that would then justify you trying to sneak into other cars. As it stands, it doesn't make a blind bit of difference, and as much as David Cage would like you to think otherwise, being forced to ride in the back of public transport in a video game simply doesn't compare to real life. Oh, and if you listen to news reports playing on the in-game televisions, you'll hear a lot of use of the term SJW, which has aged about as well as someone who uses the term SJW. All in all, nothing Eidos Montreal tried to do with the race analogy worked, and frankly it wasn't worth the risk for the minimal difference it makes in-game. Speaking of missteps, we have the 3 pieces of DLC. The first is barely worth mentioning. Desperate Measures was a pre-order bonus mission that I finished in about 40 minutes. The second, System Rift, is a bit longer and sees you working with Pritchard from Human Revolution to hack into some servers. It feels a bit like the bank heist level, just without good level design. The final one, A Criminal Past, is a flashback to Jensen's time between the 2 games and sees him in prison. They all miss the mark in some fairly basic ways. Desperate Measures and System Rift both take place during the events of the main game, and yet for some reason you cannot do them during the game. You have to select them from the menu instead. This means Jensen's augmentations are all reset and you have to start again. You do get a fair few skill points to play with and can find more praxis kits during the mission, but it won't get you back to where you were during the base game. And what on earth is the point in having players think about their build choices for a mission that can easily be finished in 30 minutes, if not less? The Criminal Past does the same thing, but it is at least slightly justified in doing so. This mission takes place before the main game, so it doesn't make sense to have a fully powered up Jensen. Technically you shouldn't have access to those experimental augmentations either, The game acknowledges this and then offers them to you anyway, basically saying it's up to you if you want to stick with the canon version of Jensen or just have more fun. I like this and think it's a good compromise. You can even elect to play without augs at all. A side effect of having limited or no augmentations is that the missions are designed with limited use of augmentations in mind, and that makes the maps less interesting. I found that stealth routes were reduced to basic unmissable vents and moving between cover. There was also a lot of waiting around for cameras to move and guards to look away, whereas when I had all my augs I had options such as temporarily deactivating the camera and running past. The DLC made stealth tedious as hell. The second DLC also has this weird mechanic in certain zones where cameras, mechs and turrets can't see you, only the heat you give off. The idea is that you then must move between heat pads to avoid being spotted. This is just weird. Quite why a room would have heat pads in it when for some reason the security can only spot sources of heat is beyond me. You get detected really quickly, so you need to carefully time each move, which again means lots of waiting around. And yet this slow boring approach is probably the best way to play it. I had a go with an aggressive gun-focused build for the DLC, and it was an absolute nightmare. The DLC has way more enemies than the base game by an order of magnitude. In fact, it feels like a different genre entirely. In addition to starting from scratch with augmentations, you have to build up your supply of ammo and guns again, so you'll be short of resources most of the time if you're taking an aggressive approach. It's a shame because the early part of the prison mission in particular was quite promising. Sneaking around in between cell blocks was appropriately challenging, with Jensen having to change outfits depending on which cell block he was in. However, once the riot started and shit hit the fan, there were guards and mechs everywhere. This is the one part of the game that can actually be challenging, and that wouldn't be so bad if I thought it were intentional. Instead, I'm pretty sure it's just bad or at least mediocre level design. Going back to the bank mission after doing the DLC was just night and day in terms of level design and interesting options. Whereas the main game provided equally appealing choices everywhere, the DLC clearly favours those who can hack computer systems. Being able to turn off the mechs and cameras is by far the easiest way to play, and it is not even close. When I tried to play the DLC aggressively, I found it strangely difficult. When I went back to playing stealthily, I found it easy but boring, and there's no real middle ground. Mankind Divided also has a bunch of microtransactions, although that's so unremarkable at this point that it's barely worth mentioning. You can buy praxis kits and credits, so it absolutely does affect gameplay. You do get plenty of praxis kits in the game though, so you only really need to spend money if you want to unlock everything in one run. It's still shitty, I still hate it, I just can't be bothered to get angry at it right now. There are also triangles hidden quite well in game, which have QR codes linking to developer interviews and the like in the now shut down Deus Ex Universe app. This isn't really a DLC thing, but I can't not mention the little spin-off game called Breach that sees Jensen play around in a kind of virtual reality hacking environment. It's not the worst thing I've ever played, but it is so clearly designed as a mechanism to get players to buy microtransactions. On each run you need resources like ammo, speed, health, etc. And while they are given to you in large quantities at the start, it seems safe to assume that this will drop off later. I don't know though, I only played it for about an hour. It's so meh that I just cannot generate feelings about it either way. I just hope it didn't detract the main dev team from the base game for too long. It's a real shame that some middling DLC is likely to be the last piece of Deus Ex content we get for the foreseeable future. After completing Mankind Divided, Eidos Montreal worked on Shadow of the Tomb Raider and then Marvel's Avengers. Last I heard, no one was working on the next Deus Ex game, although everyone involved is keen to say it hasn't been cancelled. I guess once the Avengers has finished failing, Eidos Montreal might be allowed to go back to what it does best. I'm not optimistic though. The 20th anniversary of Deus Ex went by with barely a word, and it just doesn't seem like anyone over there cares about the series. Mind you, if Invisible War didn't kill the franchise, nothing can. Clearly I would like more Deus Ex games, especially if they play like Mankind Divided. Give me another small hub area like Prague to explore, please. I couldn't care less about the story at this point. Adam Jensen is nothingness personified, and it's remarkable how little of interest there has been in the prequels. They have both been boring and toothless in a way that the original game never was, and I don't have any faith in the team at Eidos Montreal to change that if a third game ever does happen. Still, if a boring story is the price I have to pay to play more Deus Ex, then I will get on board. Alright, that's it for this video and this series on Deus Ex. If you enjoyed the video, please hit like, subscribe and leave a comment for the algorithm gods. For those who'd like to go the extra mile, I do have a Patreon where you can get your name in the credits for $1 a month. I will probably only charge for months in which I put out a video, and you can always get a refund if you need to for any reason. You'll also get a Patreon role in my Discord server. I'm not sure what video is next. I will continue the History of Isometric CRPG series at some point. I'm reluctant to start any other big series of videos because I'm not sure how much longer I'll be doing the channel. However, I also keep getting ideas for games I want to cover, and I have a list a mile long, so I don't think I'll actually be able to stay away. Okay, until next time. Cheers.